Sometimes you want to load related data and sometimes you don't. So how would you customize a database query based on some user input? We're going to go over that right now. The code for this demonstration is down below the video, so make sure you clone it. If you are using my code, also make sure that you run the migration so that your database is set up properly. Once you have that ready, let's get started. Okay, looking at our starting point here, we're in our customer controller and we're loading projects. But there may be a situation where we don't want to load our projects. So how do we add that customization to this query without creating a whole new route and a whole new method to handle that? It's actually not that hard. So first we have to rewrite this just a little bit. Rather than await customer query, we're going to just return our customer query and put it right here. And that's our starting point. Next, we check some statement. So if add projects, for example, if that is true, then we'll take our query and then we'll add our with clause. With projects. Now, if add projects is false, we won't add that. Next, we get our results. Const customers equals, now we use our await keyword. We await our query and we fetch it. And that's all there is to it. So we simply broke up our original query and we appended to it. And then once that's all done, at the very, very end of our query, that's when we await our fetch. If you await up here, then none of this will work. So you have to do it right down here. And then we have our customers. So right now, add projects, we'll just set that to false. And you'll see now that in our query right here, I have my projects being returned. But now that this is false, our projects won't be returned with our query. So I'll get my customers. And we only have our customers here. If I change this to true, then the query will be the new with clause, our relationship, our eager loading will be added to the query, and then it'll work just fine. So now we have our customers as well as the projects for each of those customers. Now, obviously, just setting add projects to true here in our controller logic is not the way to go. Instead, we'd like to take some sort of configuration object from the front end and build our query out accordingly. So we have two things to think about. How do we send those query parameters from the front end? And then how do we take them here in the back end and use them? First, let's take a look at how we grab them in our index method here and then use them to build out our query. So all query parameters are found on the request object. And I take out those query parameters like so. Query params equals request.get. Now I'm only interested in the add projects property on the query parameters object. So I'll pull that out with destructuring. And now I don't need this. We can also set defaults here, which is important because we don't want to bother our front end with setting true and false for every single parameter that can be set. So that's why we'll set this as a false default. So if add projects is not set at all, then we just assume that projects are not desired in this particular query. So now let's do our request again, and add projects should default to false, which means that our projects won't be loaded. And here we have just our customers, no projects with that query, exactly as we thought. Now let's look at how we actually send these parameters with our request. So in Postman here, we can set our params by clicking the params button right here. And we'll set our add projects to false. Now the important thing is here, when we send query parameters, our true, our false, etc. will all be received as a string. So we have to add an extra check here. We want to make sure that our query param equals true. If it equals anything else, then this will be skipped. So let's make sure that works. We'll click send. We should not have our projects. Good. Now we'll change this to true and we'll send that. And now we have our projects, just as we expect. Let's take that out again. No query parameters this time, should default to false, and we don't have them. Now it's important to realize that I should not set this to does not equal false. And the reason for that is if I send up a query parameter equal to anything other than true or false, let's say I set it to some nonsense string, this will flag as true and will append our projects, even though we don't intend to. So we'll put our query parameter here, add projects equals just some gobbledygook there. If I send this, we will actually see our projects here in the results. Not what we intended. So since something was set, this was not undefined and our default did not kick in. And this still flags, it doesn't equal false, You see, it's another string altogether. Therefore, this evaluates to true, and we actually eager load our projects, which is not what we want. If I were to instead keep this as equals true, this string does not equal true, and then we won't add our projects into our query results. Oh, got to save that. There we go. That helps if I actually save my changes. There we go. Okay, now it's time for a challenge. Let's say I want to load all of my customers with all of their incomplete projects. I'm not interested in any projects that have already been done and dealt with. I only want to see those new projects that have not been finished yet. So how would you do it? You might find your answer in the documentation. So look under Lucid Relationships under the Eager Loading heading. So give that a shot on your own, and when you're done, come on back. Okay, did you figure it out? Let's hop on over to the documentation first, and then we'll do it ourselves. So looking in the docs, we have under the Adding Runtime Constraints heading, this is under our Eager Loading. You can see an example right here. We have our with statement, just like we have right here. And then you can pass in a function as a second argument, and this gives us access to the subquery builder. And from there, we can have our where statement put our constraint on our results. So let's go over to our projects. We now have our projects query. And we'll take our projects query and we'll use our where statement, where completed equals false. We'll open Postman and give this a try. I'll make sure this is set to true again because we do want to add our projects to this query. Send. And you'll see we only have 2 projects returned now. That's because in my database, some of my projects are marked as complete. I'll open my database and you'll see I have 2 projects complete, so those will not be returned in the query. If I change this to true, I only want to see the completed projects. Perhaps I'm putting together some sort of a report. I'll send that, and we have different projects now. We have project 1 and project 3. I'll change this back, and you'll see we'll have project 2 and 4 instead. Now we have project 2 and project 4. So that's a good way that you can add constraints to your queries. But again, you may not want to hard code this in your controller. What if you wanted to do this conditionally based on some sort of configuration passed over from the front end? Pause the video and give this a try on your own. See how you can add constraints conditionally to this query. And when you're done, come on back. Did you figure it out? Hopefully you didn't overthink it. There are actually quite a few ways we could do this, and overthinking things can slow you down quite a bit. So let's just keep things simple and work with a basic example. We need another flag here from our query parameters, and we'll just set this to completed. And this will be set to false by default. So by default, we'll only return those projects that have not yet been completed. And then we just add a simple if statement within our constraint function right here. So if completed equals true, then we'll change this to true. We will filter only on those projects that have been completed. Else, we'll use false. We'll use our default. And that's it. Of course, there's lots of different scenarios we could cover here, but again, we're just working with a simple example. So let's pass in our second query parameter. We'll set completed to true. And now we won't get project 2 and 4, we'll get 1 and 3. So here's project 1 now, it's completed, marked 1. And project 3 also completed. Now let's change this to false. And we should only get those that have not been completed yet. And sure enough, we get those projects that haven't been completed yet, 2 and 4. Now for a final challenge, let's see if you can also wire up getting tasks when we get project. This should be optional, and you should check whatever's being sent from the front end to see if this is how you should do your query. So pause right now and give that a try, and then come back when you're done. Now this one can be a little bit tricky, so I don't blame you if you got stuck. We don't want to get our tasks unless we're getting our projects first, and we eager load our tasks off of our projects query. Now first we'll need to set up a flag to see whether or not we want to return the tasks at all. So add tasks, and we'll set that default to false, and we'll just add another if check down here within our constraint function. So we'll grab our projects query for that. If add tasks equals true, then we grab our query, we add our with statement to grab our tasks. And it's as simple as that. So now over in Postman, we'll add our new query parameter, add tasks, and we'll set this to true. Now when we send our request, we should get all of our tasks with our projects here. And there they are. We see for our two incomplete projects, we have our tasks right there. Now let's set this to false so we make sure that we don't have them anymore. And that works as expected. Now, I highly encourage you to play around with this a little bit more. Try to think of different scenarios where you'd want to send different results based on certain inputs in your query parameters. If you're working with a front-end application like Vue or React, I'll show you quickly how you can send query parameters with your GET requests. Many people use Axios as a library. So if you have Axios GET, you'd put your URL here, and you have the option to pass in another object for configuration. So you'd send another object here. This object would have a params object, and this is where you set your query parameters. So you could add tasks, and you could set this to true, add projects, set it to true, and that will work just fine. And then you'll be able to grab those just as we did using Postman here. Now, if you want to go even further with this, then you could even add additional constraints to our tasks check. You can grab completed versus uncompleted, have some fun with it and play around. It's important that you do that so you get to know this a little bit better than what we just covered here in the video. Now, if you have any questions about anything we covered in this video, please post those questions down below. I also appreciate any other comments, thumbs up, and be sure to subscribe to the channel. We'll see you next time.